Well, welcome to our KVML Candidates Forum, tonight featuring the two candidates running for the U.S. House District 5 congressional seat. The incumbent is Tom McClintock, and the challenger is Mike Barkley. McClintock, a Republican, Barkley, a Democrat. It is the first debate that we are airing this primary election season. Next Wednesday, we will have the two candidates running for Assembly District 8, George Radonovich and David Tangapaw. And then on October 2nd, it'll be the five candidates running for the Angels Camp City Council. Tonight is a chance to hear where the candidates stand on issues ahead of the November 5th general election. It's a wide congressional district. It includes parts of 8 counties, stretching from El Dorado County over to Fresno County, through the Motherlode counties, Calaveras, Tuolumne, and into the Central Valley, such as Modesto and Turlock. How it'll work is that there will be time for opening statements, a series of questions in which each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer, and then time at the end for closing statements. During questions, if one of the candidates directly attacks the other and that candidate has already answered the question, they will have the opportunity to quickly respond if they so choose. So we're going to kick things off with opening statements. We'll start first with Congressman McClintock.
Well, thank you very much, BJ, and thanks to you and to KVML for hosting this debate. If you think about it, an election is simply Americans talking to Americans, neighbors talking to neighbors, sorting out their differences and finding a common path for our nation. We then express at the ballot box. So thank you for doing this, and Mike, thank you for stepping forward the way you have. I've had the privilege of representing this region now for 14 years during my 16 in the Congress. My focus has always been on the border, on the budget and our economy, and on our natural resources, particularly our regional resources. As you know, I serve the last 2 years as chairman of the House Subcommittee on Immigration of the House Judiciary Committee. It was in that capacity that we developed the landmark H.R. 2 border security bill, which has been described as the toughest border security bill in a century. At its core, it requires the steps that the Trump administration took to provide the security of our borders that they did. It's the most secure borders in more than 40 years. So that's where a lot of my time has gone. I also serve as a senior member of the House Budget Committee. In that respect, I have worked to try to restore fiscal sanity to our federal budget. The National Taxpayers Union has rated me this year as one of the 2 top votes for taxpayers in the entire House and Senate combined. Citizens Against Government Waste named me 100% vote, one of only 2 in the Congress for my work against waste, and then natural resources, and we can get to that later, but basically to restore sound forest management to our forests and to restore an era of reservoir construction to meet our water needs.
And Mike Barkley, opening statements.
My name is Mike Barkley. I'm running for Congress in Congressional District 5, which runs from Pilot Hill, north of Placerville, down to Hume Lake in Kings Canyon, and includes large parts of Stanislaus County and El Dorado County and North Fresno. I'm running to protect and improve the things you care about, such as Social Security and Medicare, voting rights. I'm running to solve California's flooding problems and the drought problems in the entire southeastern United States, to improve fire response and to improve the availability of homeowners insurance at prices you can afford, and many other things. Thank you.
Got a lot of questions to get into during this debate between the two candidates, again, for Congressional District 5. I'll start the first question with Mike Barkley, and all the candidates will have a chance both to answer all of these questions. And the first one is inflation. Is it a major concern for you? And if so, what should be done to tame it?
It's always a major concern for me. Lowering interest rates will help. We spent a lot of money in the bounce back from the COVID epidemic, more than I think we should have, and that was inflationary. The supply chain interruptions, that was inflationary, and we seem to be heading in the correct direction on both of those.
And Congressman McClintock, same question for you. Inflation, is it a major concern? And if so, what should be done to tame it?
Oh, yes, it's a huge concern. During the last 4 years, we've seen the worst inflation in 40 years. Total inflation is about 20%, which means that if you had $100,000 in your IRA 4 years ago, that $100,000 only buys about $80,000 of goods and services now. When Donald Trump left office on Inauguration Day, our inflation rate was 1.4%. Then the Biden and Harris administration came in and approved trillions of dollars of reckless and unnecessary spending. The so-called Inflation Reduction Act, the American Recovery Act, poured trillions of dollars into the economy. And any first-year economics student will tell you that inflation is caused by too many dollars chasing too few goods. Kamala Harris cast the deciding vote on both of those measures and unleashed the worst inflation that our country has seen in 4 decades. Is a very simple way to stop that. It's the spending stupid. You've got to restrain the spending, the reckless spending this administration has undertaken. Has now produced a $2.5 trillion annual deficit of approaching $36 trillion for our country. These are unprecedented numbers, and they're completely unsustainable.
Stay with Congressman McClintock for the next question. It's in relation to health care. Do you feel the Federal Affordable Care Act should remain in place? And if not, what should replace it?
No, as you recall, the Affordable Care Act was supposed to make health care affordable. Health care costs have continued to soar out of control. It has been the biggest single cost driver in the expansion of Medicaid. And ask anybody who's dependent upon it, they'll tell you the deductibles are absolutely crushing. We need to get back to a system that works, and that system was one where Americans had the freedom to choose among hundreds of competing health care plans. They had the freedom to shop across state lines, as you do for any other kind of insurance. With this, as with so many of our other problems, Ronald Reagan was right. Government is not the solution to this problem. Government is the problem. The solution is the kind of market that works. We can assure a base health care for all Americans, but do so in a competitive environment where then Americans are free to choose the plan that best meets their own needs, that they can own, that they can control, and that they can fire if it's no longer suiting their needs.
And Mr. Barkley, over to you. Same question on the Affordable Care Act.
The Affordable Care Act should stay in place until we replace it with Medicare for All, which is what we should be doing. Bernie Sanders has the right idea. His program will solve it. If you go to Taiwan, you get a card. You can take that card, you can go to any health provider you want, and all of your health problems are taken care of. And we can't afford that here, but they can afford it in Taiwan. We're spending money on the wrong things. We should spend it on that.
Stay with Mr. Barkley for the next question. And it's in relation to the U.S. Supreme Court. Do you feel that the Supreme Court should either increase its memberships or have term limits? Would you be in favor of changes to the Supreme Court in that regard?
Increasing the membership seems to be about the only solution at the moment. With the Dobbs decision, the Supreme Court conservative majority decided to revoke a recognized constitutional right. Now, if you look in the Constitution, you will find no place in there where the Supreme Court has the right to do that, but they did it anyway. What we should do to make them notice it is to revoke the budget allocations for their office expenses until such time as they stop violating the Constitution and their oath. Thank you.
And Congressman McClintock, same question to you. What's your opinion in regards to the Supreme Court should either increase membership or have term limits?
I think the independence of the Supreme Court is one of the foundations of our freedom as a nation. And I am appalled by proposals to pack the court by expanding it to add as many leftist judges as they need to tilt the balance. This is part of a plan that the Democrats have been very clear about. If they take the House, the Senate, and the White House, they will pack the court with as many seats as is necessary to flip the balance. They will pack the Senate with as many new states as necessary to maintain permanent control. That's the D.C. statehood movement. They'll bypass the Electoral College with their compact of the states. Tim Walz has already signed that measure in Minnesota. They will rig the election laws the way they have in California, severing the chain of custody between the voter and the ballot box. And they will leave our borders wide open and register the millions of illegal aliens to vote in our elections. They've already made that very, very clear. And the Supreme Court packing proposal is a shocking and dangerous proposal that's part of that.
Kind of moving over to Congress and the U.S. Senate, are term limits something that you would support when it comes to the legislative office? That's starting with Mr. McClintock.
No, I supported term limits when they were proposed in California back in, 1990, because I thought they would produce a different approach by the members arriving. The members would be much more skeptical of the bureaucracy, much more independent of the leadership, because they knew they had just a limited time to make their mark and then leave. What I discovered of having supported them in 1990 is exactly the opposite happened. Members arrived not contemplating their political mortality, but planning on their next political move. That made them much more dependent upon the leadership for support. That made them much more dependent on the bureaucracy because the bureaucrats had a monopoly of experience. It shifted the balance of power from the people's representatives to the unelected bureaucrats. And the simple question I'd ask is, look at California. Did term limits make our legislature better or worse? And I think that answer is self-evident to most people. And why would we want to do that with our Congress?
And Mr. Barkley, over to you. Term limits for Congress or the U.S. Senate, is that something you would support?
I disagree with the proposals. The business of legislating in these larger entities, especially Congress, is quite difficult. Budgetary concepts, the writing of legislation itself, fitting things in with the Internal Revenue Code, that kind of stuff. This stuff takes years to get to grasp. What we don't need is to increase the ratio of amateurs writing our legislation.
Start with Mr. Barkley for this next question. There's been talk by the presidential candidates about a wide range of things, such as tariffs to banning price gouging at the supermarket. What are the things that you would like to see the federal government focus on when it comes to economic policy?
I would like to see California's flooding risk solved, and from that, the drought problems in the entire Southwest. That would do a lot for the entire country. And actually, northern Mexico also, we get a lot of our vegetables from there, and we keep stealing the water from them. Beyond that, I have a balanced budget on my website, which I wrote in 2011 and updated until Barack Obama was no longer in office. I couldn't trust his successor to present valid figures, so I stopped doing it then. But it is possible to balance the budget even with the spending that we're doing.
And over to Congressman McClintock. And the question, presidential candidates have been talking about things like tariffs to banning price gouging at the supermarket. What are the things that you would like to see the federal government focus on when it comes to economic policy?
Well, we know how to revive an economy. We've done so many times before. You cut the tax and regulatory burdens that are crushing enterprise, and the economy blossoms. You add taxes and regulatory burdens, and the economy withers. We've seen that time and again under both Democratic and Republican administrations. It wasn't just Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump who cut taxes and produced remarkable periods of economic growth, and it wasn't even just Republicans like Calvin Coolidge joining that group. It was Democrats like John F. Kennedy who cut taxes, and each time we saw the economy expand dramatically. During the Trump tax cuts, we actually saw an increase in revenues because of the enormous positive effect they had on our economy. We had the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, the lowest poverty rate in 60 years, the fastest job growth in 40 years. That was the effect of these. And we also know how to crush an economy because we've seen that happen too. We've seen it, what happens when taxes are heaped upon producers and consumers. That's what a tariff is, a tax. And you'd think we would by now have learned the difference.
And I'm staying with Congressman McClintock for the next question. It's in relation to fire resiliency on national forest land. In your case, as a congressman, what is your plan for fire resiliency?
Well, I chaired the Federal Land Subcommittee of Natural Resources for a number of years. And in those years, I learned that all of that excess timber that a forest produces is going to come out of that forest in only one of two ways. Either we will carry it out, or nature will burn it out. That's why we formed the U.S. Forest Service, to do some gardening in our forests, to remove that excess timber before it can choke the forest off, cause it to succumb to disease, pestilence, drought, and ultimately catastrophic wildfire. And it did so very, very effectively until we passed the environmental laws in the 1970s that made forest management endlessly time-consuming and ultimately cost-prohibitive. And the result we see around us all today of a morbidly overgrown forest, the Sierra carrying about 4 times the timber density that the land can support. So those forests are dying and succumbing ultimately to wildfire. We've lost about 25% of our national forests to catastrophic fire in the last decade because of these laws. The simple response is we need to repeal those laws or at least to streamline them. I was successful in getting that done in the Tahoe Basin. We took the environmental reviews for forest thinning projects from 4.5 years down to a matter of months. It's increased the treated acreage in the Tahoe Basin threefold. That's what saved the city of South Lake Tahoe from the Caldor fire. We need to extend that law throughout our federal forest system. I have a bill to do that. It's passed the House Natural Resources Committee. I'm trying to get it heard on the House floor. But ultimately, that is the solution. We know how to manage our forests. We did so for a century. Effectively, we had healthy forests, fire-resilient forests, and a thriving local economy.
And Mike Barkley, over to you. What is your plan to improve fire resiliency on national forest land?
I agree with all of Congressman McClintock's comments about improving the gardening. I would like to add to that, we need more reservoirs in the mountains for water supply, for firefighting. We need to widen the escape routes throughout the Sierras. There are some areas like where the creek fire happened east of Fresno, and if you haven't been there, if you haven't driven up to the top of the mountain and looked over the edge, that was truly horrific. And the people in Big Creek were stuck there. They couldn't get out because of the winding roads, narrow winding roads. The roads need to be widened. The roads, foliage on the side of the roads needs to be thinned out. But the rest of that, I think Congressman McClintock is correct.
One of the issues that's kind of a hot-button issue is in the foothills especially is proposals for attendance caps at Yosemite. And so, Mike Barkley, this next question staying with you. The National Park Service is considering a permanent plan to limit attendance at parks like Yosemite during peak season. Where do you stand on that?
It probably needs to be done.
And Congressman McClintock.
This has been catastrophic to all of the gateway communities that depend upon the commerce that Yosemite tourism generates. I have fought that every step of the way. Yes, the valley is very crowded in the summertime, but one of the primary reasons for that is they removed a lot of the parking and campsites that we had prior to the Great Flood in 97. Congress appropriated money to restore that capacity, and the Park Service used it for other purposes. When I first met with the Park Service many years ago at Yosemite, they've got a placard in the conference room there, and the placard says, "Is it the right thing for the park?" And I told them that's exactly the wrong question. The question you should be asking is it the right thing for the park's visitors? That's an attitude problem. We just met, all of the gateway businesses just met with the park superintendent there and read her the riot act over the damage that these the reservation system and the caps are doing. The Park Service refuses to listen to the many good ideas that the local businesses have put forward to manage crowds in the summertime and at the same time welcome tourists to the area. You know, one of my favorite quotes from John Muir's diary was one. He was looking down on the valley. And he said, "The valley is filled with people, yet they do not annoy me." Because he knew they might come to the valley as tourists, but they leave as evangelists. That attitude has long since gone from the Park Service, and we need to get it back.
Stay with Congressman McClintock for the next question. What's your opinion of the Social Security system, and does it need to be overhauled?
Well, it's going to bankrupt in 2035, according to the trustees. Now, what that means is that the revenues generated by the payroll tax will be insufficient to meet the obligations. It will translate into about a 20% reduction in the Social Security benefits of every person who depends upon it, who receives it. So when people say, "Oh, don't touch Social Security," what they mean is, let Social Security go bankrupt in 2035 and reduce the benefits for people who have spent their entire lives planning to receive those benefits in their retirement. So something has to be done. Now, there are three dials on the Social Security system. You can reduce benefits, you can increase the taxes, or you can increase the retirement age. Of those three, I prefer the latter. Extend the retirement age for those who are just entering the system. That's how we fixed it back at the beginning of the Reagan administration. We were facing the same actuarial problems then. The retirement age for those who were either approaching or in Social Security wasn't changed. But for those just entering, the retirement age was slowly, incrementally increased from 65 years to 67 years. That reflects the increased life expectancy that modern medicine has produced since the Social Security Administration was formed in the early 1930s. I think that's probably the most fair and painless and logical way to do it. It's worked before. But I think it'll ultimately be a combination of those three when it's finally addressed. But time's not our friend. The sooner we address it, the less drastic the adjustments will need to be.
And Mike Barkley, same question to you. What's your opinion of the Social Security system, and does it need to be overhauled?
Well, we need to remove the limits on personal wages that are taxable for Social Security. We need to look for other funding sources, such as Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax, which addresses the problem of taking money from poor people and giving it to billionaires. And that should do it.
And staying with Mike Barkley for this next question, it's in relation to foreign policy. I'm curious, just what do you feel is the biggest threat right now related to foreign policy?
World War III, which is what Vladimir Putin is working on. He is nibbling at the entirety of Europe. As Kamala Harris mentioned the other day, the folks in Pennsylvania, the 700,000 people who have Polish heritage, are anxiously watching what's happening in Eastern Europe because Poland is next. Vladimir Putin needs to go away, but I don't see any ethical way to make him go away from our standpoint. But we need to help Ukraine defend itself better.
And Congressman McClintock, what do you see as the biggest threat right now related to foreign policy?
This axis of evil that is forming between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. We need to remember that during the Trump administration, the world was quite stable and very much at peace. What happened with the botched withdrawal of Afghanistan was absolutely catastrophic. And it wasn't just turning over billions and billions of dollars of military equipment to the Taliban, the very people who attacked us on 9/11. It wasn't even the release of the 5,000 terrorists at Bagram, many of whom I am afraid have now entered our country, and we will be hearing from them shortly. But it was the signal that was sent around the world that America is feckless, incompetent, and weak. And it was from that catastrophic event that we see world events spinning out of control. Russia attacking Ukraine, Hamas attacking Israel. All of these stem from the instability that was produced by the incompetence of this administration. And whatever you think about Donald Trump as a person, our enemies feared him, and the result was a relatively stable world situation that fell apart when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took the reins.
Another hot-button topic is immigration policy. We'll stay with Congressman McClintock for this question. What would you like to see done at the federal level when it comes to immigration policy?
Restore the Trump policies that secured our border. As I said, the day he left office, we had the most secure border in 40 years. The Remain in Mexico policy had slowed phony asylum claims to a trickle. The border wall was nearing completion, and we were actually enforcing court-ordered deportations. On their very first day in office, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris reversed all of these policies. They rescinded the Remain in Mexico program. They ordered a complete halt to the border wall. You couldn't. We were not even allowed to close the gates that were open on Inauguration Day. That's how severe that order was. And they actually ordered ICE to stop enforcing court-ordered deportations. The result is the largest illegal mass migration in the history of civilization. They have deliberately allowed into the country about 7.5 million destitute illegal aliens who are now causing enormous dislocation throughout our cities and towns. And I've asked this question of the Democrats for years. How do you improve our schools? By packing our classrooms with non-English speaking students. How do you strengthen the social safety net? By admitting millions of destitute of people requiring welfare. How in the world do you improve our hospitals? By packing emergency rooms with illegals demanding care. How do you make our communities safer? By flooding our streets with fentanyl and making it all but impossible to deport illegal criminal aliens. So the point is, we know how to secure our border. All of that and more is in H.R. 2 that came through my subcommittee that passed the House and is waiting action in the Senate.
And Mike Barkley, over to you. What would you like to see done at the federal level on immigration policy?
Well, everything in legislation, if it's done right, is a compromise. There was one on the desk of the Senate, and Donald Trump torpedoed it because he wanted it as a campaign issue rather than as a solution. We should adopt that and go ahead with it. Beyond that, Bernie Sanders had in 2016 a very fair immigration platform plank, which would have solved most of the problems and yet not be vindictive towards anyone. Thank you.
And Mike Barkley, I'll stay with you for this next question. Would you like to see the federal government implement any type of new restrictions related to firearms?
Yes. Firearms should be a privilege, not a right. Haven't you noticed, if you look at Channel 3 every night, for instance, there is a story about shooting, and the next night a story about shooting. And they never mention what the problem is in this country. We're shooting too many people in this country. There are too many firearms. It's too easy to get them. The more firearms, the more shooting. And civilized countries have solved this problem. What is wrong with us?
And Congressman McClintock, would you like to see the federal government implement any type of new restrictions related to firearms?
We have 50 years of experience with gun control laws in this country. And what we have found is they are very, very effective at disarming law-abiding citizens. They are completely ineffective at disarming criminals and terrorists and lunatics. We know what works. Executing murderers works. putting gun criminals in jail until they're old and gray works. And an armed, honest citizenry that can actually defend itself works. The gun control laws that have been passed ultimately create a society where law-abiding citizens are unarmed and criminals are just as well armed as ever. That is a very dangerous place to live. And you see in this country, the communities with the harshest gun control laws are usually those that also have the highest murder rates. That ought to tell you a lot right there.
Staying with Congressman McClintock, what should the federal government's role be, if any, in regulating impacts related to climate change?
Yeah, I am constantly shocked by the left obsessing over a 1 degree increase in temperatures over the next century, and yet completely oblivious to the fact that their policies, their war on fossil fuels, is making it financially impossible for people to heat their homes in sub-freezing winters or to cool their homes in summers that are gradually growing warmer. This is insanity. This war on fossil fuels has made done enormous damage to our economy, enormous damage to the ability of families to make ends meet, and it hasn't helped the environment any either. You know, the UCLA did a study a couple of years ago and concluded that the 2020 fires in California, because of the environmental laws that have made the management of our forests impossible, the fires in that single year released twice the carbon dioxide as has been prevented by the state in the last 20 years with all of the draconian restrictions they placed on the people of California that are driving businesses out of our state and that are causing the highest electricity and gasoline prices in the country. These policies are insane. They are self-destructive, and they are not helping.
And Mike Barkley, same question over to you. What should the federal government's role be, if any, in regulating impacts related to climate change?
When the ice caps melt, my house and his house will be 200 feet below sea level. If what we're doing is not working, we need to find other solutions, but we need to go after climate change with the vigor that we go after Hitler.
We'll stay with Mike Barkley for this next question. Do you feel the Trump tax cuts should be allowed to expire? And if so, should they be replaced with something else?
They should expire. They should be replaced with something more fair to the middle class.
And Congressman McClintock.
Actually, the experience of the Trump tax cuts was that the upper income earners actually ended up paying a larger percentage of income taxes than working class taxpayers. So this was very much a working class tax cut. But more importantly, you remember all of the lurid tales about how this is going to cost the Treasury trillions of dollars of revenue. We actually collected more revenue after the Trump tax cuts took effect because of the positive impact that they had on our economy. And it goes back to something that John F. Kennedy said when he cut taxes in his administration and produced the same increase in prosperity. He said a rising tide lifts all boats. That was true then. It's true today. Allowing those tax cuts to expire is a massive tax increase upon the American economy, and particularly among working Americans. Do you think that is going to make it easier for people to make ends meet? Do you think that's going to help the economy, or do you think it's going to hurt it? You know, this is one of the fundamental differences in the philosophy between the two parties. Who is in the better position to decide how your earnings are spent, you or your betters in the government? I'm betting on you.
Staying with Congressman McClintock for the next question. Water is obviously a big issue across the West. What would you focus on in the Congress when it comes to federal water policy?
Build more reservoirs. It's not altogether complicated. I not only chaired for a number of years the Federal Land Subcommittee, I also chaired for a number of years the Water and Power Subcommittee of the House Natural Resources Committee. And what I learned in those years was, droughts are nature's fault. They happen. But water shortages are our fault. Water shortages are a choice we made a generation ago when we passed the same environmental laws that make it impossible for us to manage our forests also make it cost prohibitive for us to build new reservoirs. We have not built a new reservoir, a major reservoir in this state of over 1 million acre feet since the New Melones in 1979. In the meantime, the population has nearly doubled. And now we're facing one of the ironies of public policy, chronic water shortages in one of the most water-rich regions of our nation. There is no shortage of suitable sites. In fact, simply completing the dams that have not been completed. I'm talking about raising Shasta to its design elevation of 800 feet. That would produce another 9 million acre feet of water on the Sacramento system. That would more than almost double the capacity that we have to store water in this region. And then completing Auburn Dam that was canceled by Jerry Brown in the 1970s would produce another 2.1 million acre feet of water, not to mention 800 megawatts of the cleanest hydro electricity that we have available. Instead, the left is using our water bonds to destroy existing dams. They've just used $250 million of our latest water bond to tear down the 3 Klamath dams in the north. This, again, is insanity, and it's got to stop.
Mike Barkley, over to you. What would you focus on when it comes to water policy at the federal level?
In 1861-62, there was a massive biblical flood in California. It produced a lake that ran from Red Bluff to Lemoore. It killed thousands of people, especially 1,000 miners on the Yuba River. It killed 800,000 head of livestock. It bankrupted the state for 2 years. Nobody got paid. That was the least of 7 such floods over the last 1,800 years. My home would be underwater if it happened again. I think his would also. Same underwater problem. The solution to the flooding problem is the same one as the solution to the water problem. We have enough water in California to relieve the entire Southwest of drought. We also have enough storage sites to add 43 million acre feet of additional storage now. The list of them is on my website. We need to do that because we have not told all these people who are buying these houses in the Central Valley that, oh, one day your house will be underwater. That levy, it will be higher than that. So I agree with much of what Tom McClintock says. Shasta needs to be raised, but that is on my list of projects in the list. Thank you.
And Mike Barkley, staying with you for the next question. What's your opinion of the U.S. Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, and should anything be done at the federal level in response?
Again, there's nothing in the Constitution that says this Supreme Court has the right to revoke a recognized constitutional right. If Congress decides to add justices to the Supreme Court, that will do it as a temporary fix. But I believe that at the moment, in the direction of censuring the Supreme Court for this unlawful action that they took, the conservative judges that voted for the Dobbs decision need to have their sources of funding for their offices revoked and no replacement be allowed from the private sector.
And Congressman McClintock, same question to you. Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. What's your reaction, and should anything be done at the federal level in response?
Well, first of all, I'm appalled by the notion that we would punish justices for exercising their constitutional duties. That completely destroys the independence of the court. But that's what the left is trying to do with their court packing scheme as well. And that ought to be a red flag for every American as they look at the mechanisms that have protected our liberty for 250 years. I support the Dobbs decision. What this court said is there is nothing in the Constitution that mentions abortion. Therefore, it is not a federal power. It is not a power that is in the is not a right that's in the Constitution. Therefore, it is a political matter that needs to be settled by the elected representatives of the individual states. the Dobbs decision was specifically written over a Mississippi law, and I think that Mississippi law probably encapsulates the consensus of the American people, and that's this: if you've got somebody lying in a hospital bed and they've got a brainwave and a heartbeat, you can't just smother them with a pillow. They are a living human being. Well, if that is the standard at the end of life, then it also ought to be the standard at the beginning of life. If you have a heartbeat and a brainwave, maybe we're talking about a separate individual with their own rights, and that occurs at about 10 weeks, which was the Mississippi cutoff. I think most people would agree with that law. I think most people would disagree with the notion that you can kill a perfectly healthy baby right up to the moment of birth, and that is what the Democratic Party platform calls for.
We'll stay with Congressman McClintock for this next question. There has been some talk from candidates at the federal level about ending the U.S. Department of Education. What's your opinion on that?
Well, we've had the Department of Education now since, the Carter years? Question: have our schools improved or have they gotten worse? I think they've gotten worse, and I think there's a lot of test data to back up that statement. And if that's the case, then the Department of Education certainly isn't helping. Frankly, I think the most important thing we could do at the federal level is, first of all, get the federal government's nose out of our classrooms and realize that we had a much better school system, delivering a much higher quality of education at much lower cost when we put teachers in charge of the classrooms, gave the teachers the responsibility to determine what learning modes were applicable to the children in their care, placed the teachers under the control of the principals, who had the power to hire and fire, who had the power to negotiate, who had the power to pay a good math and science teacher more than we pay a good gym teacher, not because we don't like gym teachers, but because good math and science teachers cost more. And we had a locally elected school board responsible to the voters that controlled the principals at the schools. That is a system that worked and worked well. I think the single most important reform at this point that we can adopt is choice. Give every parent the means through a voucher or a tax credit to select the school that best meets their own child's needs. In any field of human endeavor, I mean, if you paid the best and the brightest person in an enterprise the same as the dullest and the laziest, you couldn't reward the good ones, couldn't fire the lousy ones, you'd have a pretty awful system. And yet that's exactly how we manage our public schools. And the result we can see now in terrible detail. So give parents a choice, restore those market competitive pressures to the education of our kids, and keep it local.
And Mike Barkley, over to you. Again, the question: there has been some talk at the federal level from candidates about ending the U.S. Department of Education. What's your opinion on that?
Don't end it. If you want to overhaul it and focus its goals a little better, that might help. We need to keep Head Start. We need to keep student loans. We need to keep grants and scholarships. We need to improve training in the trades. We need to put the training in the trades on an equivalent level with STEM education in the junior colleges, and beyond that, keep the department.
Mike Barkley, I'll stay with you for the next question. It's a high-stake presidential election as well coming up in November. One of you will be working with either President Kamala Harris or President Donald Trump. Mike Barkley, what are your big takeaways so far of the presidential election?
Well, it got a little more exciting after Joe Biden withdrew. So we will see how that works out. I think the second debate was interesting. President Trump doesn't want a third debate. I am appalled at the sudden emergence of assassination attempts. And again, there's too many guns.
And Congressman McClintock, your takeaways of the presidential race to this point?
Well, I think it presents one of the clearest choices in American history. The question that Ronald Reagan asked in 1980 is certainly applicable here. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? The beauty of that question is you can't spin the answer to it. Everybody knows in their own lives how they're doing. And that's the question that we have to ask. Are we better off today than we were 4 years ago? You can answer that question for yourself, but I remember way back 4 years ago to the Trump administration when we were lowering taxes, reducing the regulatory burdens, and seeing one of the highest growth economies in our lifetimes. That's ultimately the question that we have. Who's going to be better at running your life, you or the government? Who's done the better job? I mean, we have two administrations side by side that we've all lived through. We can see the impact of policies that worked under the Trump administration. We can see the impact of the policies that have not worked under the Biden and Harris administration. I can't think of a clearer choice than that.
Well, a final question before we go to closing statements, and I'll go to Congressman McClintock here. Are there any other issues that I haven't brought up tonight or asked questions about that you're focusing on this campaign and feel should be a priority in Washington, D.C.?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I think the most important questions facing our country are securing our borders. You know, history is screaming this warning at us that countries that either cannot or will not secure their borders simply aren't around very long. If you're not going to enforce your immigration laws, you have no immigration laws. If you have no immigration laws, you have no border. And if you have no border, you have no country. And that's the position that the Biden-Harris administration has put us in. And does anybody want to go another 4 years down that road? Another warning that history is screaming at us is that countries that bankrupt themselves simply aren't around very long. Because before you can provide for the general welfare or promote the general welfare or provide for the common defense, you have to be able to pay for it, and the ability of our country to do so is now coming into grave danger under this administration. The interest costs on our debt, we're talking about simply renting money we've already spent long ago, is now more than our entire national defense budget. That is simply not sustainable. And that's why I put so much time and effort into my work on the Budget Committee. And then we've covered the natural resources issues. I think that's absolutely critical to particularly to our local region.
And Mike Barkley, over to you. Any topics or issues that I didn't bring up during tonight's debate that you're focusing on?
The Congress passed the Tax Reform Act of 1986, which increased the length of time for depreciation and cut the percentage. It identified passive income and put limits on it. It identified tax preference items and put an alternative minimum tax on it. And the result of that is that the construction of in the tax shelter apartment market fell off a cliff. In the 25 years before that act, Manteca, for instance, built thousands of apartments. In the 25 years after it, Manteca only developed two large complexes, one of which was already on the books in 1986. In 1998, Congress passed the Faircloth Amendment, which put a cap on the number of subsidized units. You could build one, but you had to tear one down for everyone you built. And at the same time, they cut housing subsidies. In 2008, where many of the people needing housing went to for refuge, low-income housing loans became one of the targets of people complaining about the housing collapse. And so that got stopped. And then along came Dodd-Frank and made it worse. So Congress killed the rental housing market. Congress killed the subsidized market. Congress killed low-income housing loans. The only thing left was sleeping bags and tents. And you see them on your sidewalks in Los Angeles and Sacramento and so on. Congress needs to fix that. Congress did it. Congress needs to fix it.
Going to move on to closing statements now, and we did a coin toss before this debate as to who goes first and second during opening and closing statements. So for closing statements, Mike Barkley, you're first.
Again, I'm Mike Barkley. I'm running for Congress in District 5. My goal is to look out for and support and strengthen things you care about, things like Social Security and Medicare, medical care for everyone, the right to vote, the rights of women, the need to repair our broken housing market, the need to solve our flooding risk and our drought problems. And there are many more things, but you get the idea. Thank you.
And Tom McClintock, closing statements.
Well, first, again, thanks to you and KVML for facilitating this discussion today. And I want to make a special call out for Mike Barkley. I mean, this is a tough district for a Democrat to run in, but he's had the courage to come forward and put his platform before voters and to engage in the discussion so that we have this debate. And frankly, that is something noble, and it is admirable, and I want to pay my respect to him for doing that. But we do have a very stark question. I think the entire history of human civilization can be summed up in 4 words. Freedom works and socialism sucks. Down through history, free societies where people run their own lives, make their own decisions, enjoy the fruit of their own labor, raise their children according to their own values and standards. Free societies are always the most prosperous, most productive, most happy, most just, and most powerful civilizations in the history of the world. And socialism produces exactly the opposite. Socialism always produces sky-high taxes, failing schools, rampant homelessness, rising crime, chronic shortages of basic necessities like electricity, water, gasoline, housing, sky-high prices to boot, ultimately fleeing failing businesses, and then fleeing families. We've seen the left destroy our most beautiful cities of the 20th century, cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles, not to mention Detroit, St. Louis, Baltimore. It comes down to this. Do we want to continue down the road we've been on these past 4 years, or do we want to restore the policies that produce the prosperity that we came to enjoy?
Going to have to cut you off right there on unfairness. Congressman McClintock, we've come to the end of the time. I want to thank you both so much for joining us on this candidate forum. We were joined by the Republican Tom McClintock, the Democrat Mike Barkley. Whoever you support, make sure you vote ahead of the November 5th election. I'm BJ Hansen. I was your moderator. And a week from tonight, September 25th, we'll hear from the 2 candidates running for Senate District 8, David Tangapa and George Radonovich. We'll see you back then.